Okay. Well, welcome everyone.
Chris.
I am Robert Gonzalez, the Dean of the School of Architecture and Planning here at the University of New Mexico. I'm going to start with a land acknowledgement. Founded in 1889, the University of New Mexico sits in the traditional homelands of the Pueblo of Sandia. The original peoples of New Mexico, Pueblo, Navajo, and Apache, since time immemorial have deep connections to the land and have made significant contributions to the broader community statewide. We honor the land itself and those who remain stewards of this land throughout the generations, and also acknowledge our committed relationship to Indigenous peoples. We gratefully recognize our history. So thank you all for joining us. This is something that's new in the program. It was never done before. The jurors, though, traditionally met the night before and had dinner in Santa Fe and would converse about the projects. And then the next day they would come to Albuquerque and present the winners. And so we've decided to make this a jury roundtable that in the future, when we're in public, will be a public event and probably held at the Thornburg Foundation. So I also want to thank the Thornburg Foundation, Alan Oliver, the executive director of the Thornburg Foundation, and Leslie Garcia, the administrative director and community funding officer, who we worked with to get funding for this competition. Most importantly, we want to thank Garrett Thornburg, who's chairman of the board. Mr. Thornburg personally leads the company's philanthropic efforts. Garrett Thornburg created this award program in honor of his very good friend and architect, Jeff Harnar. And let me just say a little bit about Jeff Harnar. Jeff Harnar was raised in Albuquerque. He earned his Bachelor's of Architecture degree from Arizona State University in 1977. He started his practice in 1984 until his untimely passing in 2006. Jeff worked organically, synthesizing material, cultural, and environmental resources into an architecture of his time. He created an impressive body of work, creating contemporary buildings throughout Santa Fe. We're honored to continue his legacy for the love of contemporary architecture with this award. I also want to thank Liz Castillo for helping us to put all of us together, and the jurors. And I especially want to thank Anthony Fetes, who's our assistant professor of landscape architecture here at the Department of Landscape Architecture. And he has been helping to steward the Jeff Harnar Awards program this year through this new expanded phase. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Anthony now. Thank you, Anthony.
Great. Thank you very much, Robert. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I just have a couple quick slides to put up to get us started here. So as Robert had said, this is, the Jeff Harnar Award's been around now for about 15 years. And tonight is the conversation with the jury to find out a little bit more insight what they learned from the awards and what was how they deliberated their process through this 15th year of the award. The award started in 2007, and basically from 2007 until 2018, the award was really just focusing on the core award that we have this year, which is the Award for Contemporary Architecture. In 2018, the award was expanded to include unbuilt architecture and landscape architecture categories, which ran for up until 2020. But up until 2020, the award was exclusively for projects that were located within the state of New Mexico. But this year, we've expanded this to include the 4 corner states in the southwestern US, and also expanded the award categories to include an emerging New Mexico practice, and then also a specific student award category for unbuilt work in architecture and landscape architecture. So with that, we did receive an increased number of entries this year, which was fantastic, from folks all over, primarily the Western US here. The jury had a great selection of projects to review this year. And just to introduce the full jury of the award categories, there were 3 sets of juries of 3 people each. The Contemporary Architecture and Emerging New Mexico Practice jury consisted of Marlon Blackwell, who is the chair in architecture and distinguished professor in the Fay Jones School of Architecture and Design at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville. He's also the founder and principal at Marlon Blackwell Architects. He unfortunately was unable to join us tonight, but the other 2 jurors are here tonight to share some of their insights from the deliberation, and that is Elaine Molinar of Snøhetta. She is a partner and managing director there, and Thaisa Wei from Dumbarton Oaks, where she is the resident program director for the Garden and Landscape Studies. For the Professional Unbuilt Architecture and Unbuilt Landscape Architecture Awards, the jury consisted of Andre Jacques, who is an associate professor of professional practice at Columbia, where he directs the Master of Science program in Advanced Architectural Design. Carlos Jimenez, who is a professor in architecture at Rice and principal and lead designer of Carlos, and he's joining us here this evening. And Phoebe Lickwar, who is an associate professor and the landscape architecture graduate advisor at UT Austin. She's also a founding principal of Forge Landscape Architecture as well. And for the student jury, we had Deborah Burke from Yale, who is an architect, educator, and dean of the Yale School of Architecture. And unfortunately, she was unable to join us tonight. But we do have the other 2 jurors from the student jury. That includes Renee Davids of UC Berkeley, who is a professor of architecture and urban design, and Frederick Steiner, who's the dean and Paley professor at the University of Pennsylvania Stuart Weitzman School of Design. So with that, I would really like to thank the jury, and we are greatly looking forward to hearing what they have to say from their deliberations. So I'm going to pop screen off. And so how we were looking to get started tonight was starting with student awards jury, and would like to hear some of their initial insights from the process. And you're also more than welcome to give an additional introduction on yourselves as well. And from the student award jury, then we'll move to the professional awards. And then lastly, we'll talk about the contemporary award in architecture. So I will hand it over to the student award jury. So Renee and Frederick.
Fritz, do you want to start?
Go ahead, Renee.
And one word before you all start. Remember, it's very important not to divulge the winners.
Yep.
So be very careful.
I just want to say thank you for inviting us. And also, I would like to commend all the students which entered the competition. I know it takes a lot of time and work, and it's very special circumstances. We're all in sort of weird situations, I think. So we really appreciate the students submitting the work. And I also would like to say that it was a great pleasure to be with Deborah and Fritz. We got on really well, and our discussions were extremely pleasant and informative, I think. I don't know, do you want to say something, Fritz, before? I just don't want to.
Yeah, sure. I want to add my thanks as well. And also just part of the reason why we function so well is Renee organized us very well. and it had us really clicking. But so thanks to everyone else, but thank you, Renee, for doing everything you did on our jury. also, just for those who, it seems like I know everyone almost that's on the screen. So it's, but I found it very interesting because I've lived in 2 of the 4 corner states. And so for me, it was the landscapes were very familiar. And so it was just, it felt like kind of going back to places that had a big influence on my life. And it was a little nostalgic in that regard. I guess we were supposed to say a few words about the entry. One of them, the landscape architecture there were only 3 entries. So I just, to be candid, was disappointed that there were only 3. And I suppose what I felt afterwards is just getting energized to get the landscape architecture community to be more aware of this award and get more entries. So I'll pledge doing that. The architecture entries were really quite interesting, and I would agree with Renee, the amount of work was evident. There were, if something stood out to me, and I think the other jurors as well, it was, many of them were bold ideas and maybe even iconic buildings, but there was, what was lacking in a good number of projects was connection to the site and to the context. And Elaine, we even used Snøhetta's Oslo Opera House as sort of our benchmark. It's certainly iconic, but also it's incredibly connected to the site and also its context. So if there are students who are looking at towards next year in the architecture category, it's sort of that moving beyond the building and placing it in its on its site or in its site as well. So Renee, I'll give it back to you.
Yeah, I forgot to say myself that I actually taught in New Mexico for 2 years before I got to Berkeley. So I've got some wonderful memories. And you were talking about the place itself, and it's the landscapes of New Mexico and the West in general, but New Mexico in particular, I think are incredibly powerful. And I couldn't agree with you more. I just, in terms of the context, I was struck and pleasantly struck, I would say, by the fact that a lot of the entries had a strong social component, which I wouldn't have been the case sort of 10 years ago, 8 years ago even. And I thought that was a really interesting and powerful thing. I don't know, most of the entries were from the area, so I don't know whether that's a regional phenomenon. It is happening at Berkeley as well, so maybe it's the West in general, although I didn't feel, at least in our school, it was quite as strong as it seemed to be in the entries. And maybe it's difficult to make a judgment. I mean, it might just be coincidence, but it struck me as being different. And I thought there was also a certain modesty, which I also appreciated to the entries. And I think, Fritz, you made some reference to that there's nothing seemed to stand out as a sort of form-wise. There was no acrobacy going on. It seemed all very sober and sort of, I would, although we did miss the fact that a lot of entries didn't seem to connect to their sites particularly well. But again, the modesty was something which I registered as a big change from the kinds of entries we would have had or sort of 10 years ago. And I thought it was a refreshing thing to see. Although I can see the dangers of going too far or exclusively in that direction as well. I don't know, is it just between the two of us, Fritz? I mean, it would be nice to hear other people as well.
I would just add one thing. There were a couple of the projects in architecture that really stood out in their thoroughness and their completeness. And we'll quote Deborah, who is building, just finishing a building on my campus. And she said that they looked like real architecture, and that the thoroughness of the work was very impressive. So I would just call that out to some of the standout projects were extraordinarily complete in their through the whole design process, and you get a sense of how they could actually be constructed.
Great. Yeah, so what we'll do is we'll go through each of the categories, and then we'll all discuss about sort of the overlap between these different categories. So I think that's really fantastic summary, and thank you to both of you. So I think let's now move to the two jurors on the professional awards. So Carlos and Phoebe.
Phoebe, would you like to start, or you like me to start? You're closer to New Mexico right now than I am. So.
Just barely.
I have a few hours. No, I'm happy, but I wanted to offer you to start.
Oh, go ahead. You can begin.
Well, anyway, thank you, Robert, and thank you, Anthony, for inviting us. It's really a wonderful opportunity to see dear colleagues and to see Fritz again, and Renee Davis, for I haven't seen in years, and others that we just met. More importantly, though, I'm impressed by the caliber of the jury and the deliberations, that it goes to show how attractive this locality of New Mexico is for many of us, which see that enchanting quality that I have learned to appreciate on my trips there. And I think when we met, we had only 8 entries. We were not aware what to expect, but we took it like a duty as a jury to address all 8 with the same amount of time and coordination. And we had a very long discussion because of that luxury of having fewer entries that allows us to really scrutinize and explore their various achievements, as well as critique where they could have been better. So that we went back and forth. It was Andres Hake and Phoebe Lickworth and myself, and we spent, as I said, a very animated afternoon. And at the end, we actually came up with what we feel, as you will learn tomorrow, a very balanced selection. What struck most of us was the power of place. It was astonishing to see in this unbuilt works the power that place exerted in the schemes, but in not solely in a positive way, but also in a almost amnesiac way. You could see how powerful this place influences the architecture, but also in some cases how easily it is to forget that place. So it's a kind of paradox in many ways. And we felt that the most successful projects that we discover and discuss at length really demonstrated how it's not simply to see the place, but really to listen to that place. And I hope that tomorrow, when you learn who the awards were given to, you can commiserate with us or agree with our decision. But that's pretty much a way of starting, Phoebe. Now that I broke the ice, perhaps you can bring the lime, as we say in this part of the country.
Thank you. Thank you, Carlos. Yeah, I just want to start by saying thank you for the invitation to participate in this process. It was really enjoyable. And wonderful to be here tonight. As Carlos said, we had 8 entries, 3 landscape architecture and 5 architecture. And despite our disciplinary boundaries, perhaps, I thought it was interesting that we all unanimously agreed, I think, on our, you know, our decision, our ultimate decision. But we were just very aligned with our thoughts on the entries. So that was interesting to me. The sense of place, as Carlos mentioned, was really a strong factor, or glaringly absent. And I think you know, it seemed to appear in regards to the uniqueness of the climate and also specific cultural traditions that the projects were relating to or engaging. And some of the entries tried to recover lost practices, which I found, you know, particularly compelling. Others tried to draw on a kind of vernacular, but the translation was sometimes really disappointing. So I think that, you know, the kind of conceptual impetus seemed to appear in various entries, but the success was different across the board.
Yeah, I think that that's a very good point that Phoebe raises that fascinated us, because we will see 2 projects almost dealing with a similar concern, but at a different scale. And sometimes it was like a David and a Goliath kind of contrast, where suddenly what you discover was that the smaller project actually had more punch or more power. And it was actually not necessarily driven by, let us say, a raw innovation, but actually it was more like a reflection of what had gone wrong with the planning or the landscape. And so there is you know, as we look at these awards or these entries, we always think that somehow the light shines only in this future that we don't really know as clearly as we pretend to sometimes. But the evidence also lies in what has happened, and we are able to analyze it. And that was one aspect I really enjoyed in our deliberations, because we were looking at a geological time in relationship to human time and how those 2 intersect. And the successful projects mediated that with, I thought, great sophistication and insight. So I hope that, again, Phoebe, you will have to expand on this tomorrow when you present the awards, which regrettably some of us will not be able to be there, and it's an apology in advance.
Mm-hmm.
I think I think that covers it for us, Anthony, but I'm sure that
All right.
you can return in any other question.
Great. No, that was excellent. And yeah, a lot of the things that you mentioned as I was looking through many of the entries as they were coming in, there was some really amazing ties to some of these practices that I thought was really impressive and really good to place on these projects. So great. All right, next let's move on to the contemporary architecture and also the jury that looked at emerging practice. So Elaine and Daisa.
Yeah. Hello. Good evening, and thank you. Thank you for being invited to participate in this. It's always really a pleasure to see what people out there are doing and to review submissions. I grew up in the Southwest, just down the road in El Paso, so this type of landscape is very familiar to me. I'm very fond of, and I've spent, you know, many hours in New Mexico. I think when we met, I think we had we're all very much in alignment as well, although for some different reasons. So that was kind of nice. It kind of reinforced that what we were thinking was relevant to the work that we were submitting, though reviewing, and we did review all of the entries. Even though I think there was a kind of an immediate alignment of where our heads were at. I think some of the qualities that came through in all the entries were a fondness for the vernacular, local materials and colors and scale also. There was often a quality of humbleness in the landscape, even in works of, really boldness, bold clarity. There was still that kind of deference to the landscape. Thaisa, what you thought?
Yeah, no, I'd be happy, and I will join everybody in saying it was an honor and fun, and I think being on juries can be some of the most fun pieces because you get to see people's best work and consider it. So it's really an honor. Yeah, I would add the piece that I was really delighted about these was to see the deep connection to place in so many of the projects. And that was about the landscape. We were looking at architecture, but it was clearly connected. And I live actually most of my time in the Pacific Northwest, so very different landscape than the Southwest. And it was really inspiring to see the different ways that designers found to connect themselves, whether it's through materials or through the placement and the use of the site. I was also really pleased to see the attention to issues of sustainability and climate change and some really responsible. I think this is a moment for designers of great privilege and great responsibility as we address the built environment writ large. And I saw so many of the entries take that seriously. And then because at least our contemporary architecture also had a piece at the end where each person or each submission described how they would support diversity, equity, and inclusion in their firm, we read a breadth of ideas and approaches. And it was also inspiring to see that come into the work and that to be asked of the firms and the submissions, and that they each actually had an idea, and they were all good ideas. I hope everyone's going to do those ideas, whether or not they move forward, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one thing that we were looking for more of was a more explicit description or explanation of how the work related to the theme of the awards, I guess, to the theme of what is contemporary architecture in the Southwest and what does that mean. I think we got a full spectrum of text.
Yeah.
Across all of the entries.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because I was thinking along a similar and I was thinking this when other jurors were talking about what they were looking at, that it is such a privilege and a responsibility to design the built environment today. And it would be great to see in these submissions a capacity to maybe stand 15,000 feet back and talk a little bit about how your project frankly contributes to a better world. How are you advancing design? How are you advancing the kind of world that I think we share, at least in broad strokes. And the same with the emerging. It's great to see new firms come up, and this is a big time to lay out a vision for design. It would be great to see more reflection. I totally agree, Elaine. I'd love to see designers really reflect on what is it they're trying to do, how do they think they're contributing, and that could be down into specifics or big broad strokes.
Right.
I wanted to just jump in because someone mentioned the EDI portion of the competition, which is not a typical part of a competition about architecture. And that comes out of work, just working on the concept of the competition with the Thornburg Foundation. The Thornburg Foundation does not support this type of work. They don't do art support. They're interested largely in water scarcity, homelessness. So this is a very different kind of award program for them. And it really just comes out of that personal connection that Garrett Thornburg had with Jeff Harnar. And in talking to them about what we could do to really address some of the issues that the Thornburg Foundation is interested in, that came out of it. It also came out of a conversation I was having with Janet Abrams, who's here on the call, and she's one of our visitors this year, the acclaimed writer, Janet Abrams. And we were both saying, what do these very large firms do with a $10,000 prize, that pays for a month of electricity and supplies or something. So we thought, how can we sort of up the ante and talk about social responsibility through the prize money too. So that's another component, and it'll show up when we present the winners. We'll also present their plans.
No, I was really pleased, Robert, it's actually great to hear that that's where it came out of. And I would add, it sort of put the onus on firm, so often, and I can say this as a historian and academic, so just take me with the snarky salt. It's so easy to say, well, we tried those things, but there just aren't enough people out there. We just can't find, or we just, 101 excuses. And this gave people the opportunity of like, okay, if you're given some resources, what would you do? And I think that's an important challenge. So I kudos to you, Robert, and the foundation for adding that.
Was that part of some of the other categories?
No, we only did it with the largest number, the $10,000 prize. The other ones are smaller prizes, so we didn't ask for that. But that's a thought.
Well, and I'll add, having just been on a jury for ASLA, and it's surprising how many people click the box, for this project addresses diversity, equity, inclusion, or this project addresses social equity, and then never explain it. So I think in this way, the fact that you had to explain it was terrific. We no longer know that we know that we can't just click the sustainability or climate change and not explain. We'll explain that, and we should be explaining our social, our social goals and strategies.
The Unbuilt Awards, Robert or Anthony, where this just happened 2 years ago, is a new thing as well, no?
Yes,
Yes.
it's fairly new.
Yes. And one thing that I think struck us as a jury was with the hope that if these projects get an award, if they're still in the category of unbuilt, that they might get more stimulation or encouragement to be built. Has that happened with some of these unbuilt, or they just projects that just get shelved? Because it would be wonderful to follow up as the jury progresses to see if the award also helps the cause behind particular projects, because it's a commendation, it's an acknowledgement of their efforts, and it would be interesting to know. At least keep us in mind a couple of years from now if any of these projects tomorrow get built, because it would be wonderful to see them built.
Yeah, that's definitely some interesting, and I think we'll definitely comb through some of those past entries to see where they stand. I think some of them, well, wait, that's right. It's only been the last few years. So there's only a handful of them out there so far. So
it seems to me that where architecture and landscape architecture are moving is they're moving closer to the goals of the foundation rather than, the heart of what we should be about is water and social equity. That shouldn't be a stretch. That should be, every project, in my view, should be, let's start with the water and social equity, and then what do we do about the birds so we don't kill them, and
Mhm.
You know, how do we stop burning fossil fuels? And you know, you guys in New Mexico, man, I mean, right now you've got Secretary of Interior. I mean, wow. I mean, there's, you know, you look at Bruce Babbitt from Arizona and Stuart Udall from also from New Mexico, and now an amazing Secretary of Interior who is not only an indigenous person but actually understands the land. I mean, they're the only three in my memory that, I mean, all the cowboys and
Sally Jewell.
Oh yeah, okay, Sally Jewell. I stand corrected. Sorry. I'm thinking of those. I'm thinking more of others that have been appointed by, let's say, some of our Republican fellow citizens who have had less sensitivity to the land and to indigenous people. But I think it's a perfect time, maybe to even move it more into the heart of what the foundation is about. Sally Jewell, yep.
Good advice.
What's the just a question? The Four Corner States. By the way, I love that title of the. It's a wonderful region to be called the Four Corner States. But Utah and we noticed primarily the projects were from Arizona and New Mexico, but obviously the other two states are going to start participating the more the award is known. And I wonder if you thought of ways of perhaps promoting this, Robert and Anthony, so that more entries can take place. I'm sure there are fascinating projects in Utah and Colorado that I don't know how you're disseminating the information, but I just think it will make that Four Corner State even more potent or more powerful, because although they share that corner, they share the same landscape, the same topography, and it's I mean, if I were to sit at that point, it's like when you're at the equator. How do I know I'm in the north and the south? You know, there is that marvelous thing, the landscape erases all vintages, and so I think it's just be interesting to see more of those two other states. And I'm sure you're aware of this, but if there's anything we can do to help to promote it, it's a great. I mean, I don't know the many awards that get $10,000 or
A fair few.
yeah, it's a substantial award, and
Yeah, well, Carlos, what we are, I mean, this year was, of course, tricky because of COVID, but we are looking to see how we are going to promote this. And we've also initiated another award program this year called On the Brink, which is in honor of and memory of J.B. Jackson, who left us a huge endowment, UNM. And so one plan is for us to produce a publication. So part of the jury roundtable discussion will help us with that, but a publication that looks at those two award programs. So we begin to promote the two award programs coming out of UNM. And hopefully if we get that out, we'll get more attention from those two quarters, the other two states. But a question is, what about Nevada? What about Texas and California? What are your thoughts on the geographic sort of definitive? I mean, the Four Corner States are like a logo in itself. What are your thoughts on that? Does that seem contrived? Does that seem to work?
As a last former Texan, I can say they'll be in a minute.
At Texas,
they especially love anything that has Colorado involved in it.
We only need part of Texas.
I know, El Paso.
Just strike the line down from the Panhandle.
Four Corner States and El Paso.
Yeah.
Well, El Paso is closer to San Diego than it is to Houston.
Yeah. I will actually say I like the four corner states. I mean, I like the states, but I thought it was really interesting to look at places that shared a regional, it's a big region, but a regional landscape and a regional set of issues. I thought there was something powerful. I feel like if you start adding California and Texas and Colorado, it just sort of becomes, and then you're sort of wondering, is there the New England and is there the South? This has a certain character. I think there was a character and a way of being in the world that came through almost every submission, which I thought was, I enjoyed that. It seems more exciting than just some generic, we drew the line this way across part of the country.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you were going to do something like that, you might need to frame it in some way, like extreme
Water.
climates, the extreme climates of the United States, which
Places
might
going dry.
might include some places in Texas, but not others. But I don't know. I also liked the regional specificity. We didn't. I don't think we had any entries from Colorado.
Yeah,
and so I mean, I do think that there is tremendous difference across the region of those four states. So it's not as if the commonality is one dimensional. It's it's very diverse across those four states. But I think if you could get the number of entries, I would be interested in just a New Mexico, and one for New Mexico itself. But having to broaden, it seems like the regional context of the four states is a really good one, and brings attention, to architecture in that region. And I think
I agree with Phoebe.
it deserves it.
Yeah, I agree with it because there's something very special about the four corner states. I was fascinated by. I never heard of such a term, and I did some more research. And Texas has plenty already. Has plenty of corners to begin with. And I don't know if they will like to share that stage, but I think it's I've been to the Pacific Northwest, and they have a kind of liaison between the Oregon and Washington and Iowa, and they share, as Phoebe was saying, a kind of let us say, atmosphere and a climate, and
An ethos, yeah.
An ethos, yes, and I think that Utah and Colorado and Arizona and New Mexico share this beautiful desert that becomes then mountainous, and it's just a powerful message. And I don't know, I will think twice about diluting the supremacy of the four corner states. And if I were a writer, I would love to write a story like my time at the four corner states or something. That's very unusual. But
I think a regional focus also distinguishes it further from the AIA category awards. There's the state, local.
Good point.
I'm fond of the four corners too, but you may want to think about sort of abandoning the accidental nature of the Jeffersonian grid and go John Wesley Powell on, would be, just go drainage basins. But no, the four corners, like the Northwest, there is an amazing literature and Desert Solitude and other amazing works from that creates the ethos. So I think the four corners is a cool idea, actually.
What about the four corners versus Southwest? Southwest in itself is, and this is reminding me of Sunset Magazine, Sunset Magazine and its construction of Western living. And actually throughout the history of Sunset Magazine, they would list one state or two states or four states, and they kept sort of revisiting that. Where does Southwest fit in all of this?
Well, it's the same. Bob Riley, who was J.B. Jackson's protege and taught for years at the University of Illinois, gave an assignment every year. Where does the Midwest begin?
Mhm.
And the students answered everywhere from Pittsburgh to Las Vegas. So, it's all these regional boundaries are, I think it's just define it yourself and
Mhm.
live with it.
Mm.
The Four Corners is a powerful symbol.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's a cardinal symbol, not too. It's
Yeah.
Yeah.
and it's a crossroads, and it I don't know. I'm attracted. As it's a literary term too, Fritz, because it does have that connotation to.
It's also, it's a designer. I mean, Jefferson did it as a way to design the country, right? To lay it out and plan it. And so there's something sort of appropriate for, though I like the Powell, the water basins, the watersheds would be another really interesting way to focus it. But I do like the Four Corners, and the Southwest just to me is too thin a statement. Just
I think it would need some serious
Oh.
attention to brand, because Southwest in the world of design has connotations.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Plus, I live close enough to British Columbia that I think of Southwest, and I have to ask which Southwest are we talking about?
Exactly. I really like the archaeological definition of Southwest by, I forgot the name of the archaeologist, but they define it as from Las Vegas to Las Vegas and Durango to Durango. So like, that's really catchy. But then they say, well, we do have to extend it up into Utah a little bit, but it's just classier to say Vegas to Vegas, Durango, Durango. All right. Well, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to ask Robert why he would like or is thinking about expanding it.
Well, one of the reasons was we talked to a lot of the jurors and a lot of the practices, and we realized that it was great that it started as a New Mexico focused award program, but we got to a point where a lot of the same firms started winning the same award over time. And there was sort of I experienced this when I was in El Paso for 9 years, that you get to a point where it's almost survival of the fittest. Some are always rising to the top and others don't quite. And there were limited number of awards. So we also wanted to see if there was a way for UNM to begin to lead a discussion on what our region is about, sort of the broader region, and the surrounding schools, the 6 schools and the 6 programs, I thought were a really wonderful opportunity to direct that discourse with the schools and to grow the student entry portion of it. Although we didn't say that the student projects had to be Southwest specific, we left it open. So I think this was sort of an exploratory year, and the Thornburg Foundation also very much liked the idea of it just becoming a larger, more nationally visible award program.
That's glad to hear. I thought you were just missing Texas, Robert. That's
So we have people. Anthony, did you want to ask about other questions or?
So yeah, I think the conversation has been kind of flowing naturally along a lot of the topics that I was thinking of, in terms of what were some of those common threads, direction of the award, in the future. I also did want to open it up to the audience if anyone has any questions as well. Let's see.
I see some entry names that are here. I
Yeah.
recognize from the list of entries. I see some of them here.
Yeah.
So it'd be great to see what they thought about the award.
Yeah, and the process of it as well. Chris Wilson asked a question. The awards are framed as contemporary design in the Southwest, and many of the jurors have spoken about the response to the site contents and sense of place in the best work. What did the jurors see as some of the strategies and characteristics of the best contemporary design grounded in the region?
Great question.
Can you read that again? Just the question part.
Yep, the last question part. What did the jurors see as some of the strategies and characteristics of the best contemporary design that's grounded in the region?
Boy, Elaine, do you have I'll go ahead and start. I think it was partly what we mentioned, which were things like really thinking about materials and not just here's my list of materials and it's appropriate, but here's how I'm using the materials. Here's where the materials came from. Here's why they're being used in this way. So it was a very thoughtful in the material list and then in the layout and the siting.
Yeah, I think looking to traditional solutions in a contemporary context, I think.
Yeah, no. And doing a number of them did a really nice job of abstracting what we might think of as vernacular approaches so that they look contemporary and yet also look very grounded. They were recognizable without looking like just a copy or a cheap imitation or but an interesting abstraction.
Yeah, I think that's true. I agree with that.
They definitely look contemporary. I mean, it's an interesting question.
And I would say, I will add, at least in our category, that what we detect perhaps was that contemporary is also a way of looking with available tools of our time. And so that allows the designers that we appreciated to communicate how those tools continue a tradition as also challenge a tradition. And in that sense, they are vital and they remain contemporary. And I agree with Thaisa that we had the similar situation where we will see projects that simply almost created facsimiles or almost literal transpositions of things that no longer make sense, but they might be appealing touristically or in the market. So I think we hope that is just another consequence of our times too. But I want to highlight that contemporary also means using the tools that we have available to learn more about our environment, to learn about, to know that the land comes first and the wind comes after and whatever, and architecture is one of the many layers in that process.
Yeah, I would say that I mentioned modesty, at least in the student category, as being yet another way in which the projects seem to belong to the place, because at least from my point of view, and having lived there, and I mean modesty in a beautiful way. I think that's very much part of the power of New Mexico. And I thought a lot of the entries had that component. And then I do agree with the comment about materiality, that it on the one hand, some of the traditional materials were used or were being proposed, but then there were also modern or contemporary materials incorporated. So that's the way I would answer the question. So very similarly, I think, to the reviewers of the other categories. And modesty might not sound like much, maybe, but I think you mentioned Chris, that your son was working in the digital world of Columbia University of a few years back. And the work would have been very exuberant in terms of forms and, the discourse. I mean, I don't know the specifics, but the discourse would have been very different. And these projects seem, in that sense, very grounded, sort of humble and preoccupied. Yeah,
I
sorry.
think the humility and the modesty often stems from poverty, lack of resources. We're regularly in the lower, 5 states and many characteristics. I mean, our performance in vaccination is a departure, which we're very proud. But I think the modesty comes from the architecture often being modest because of limited resources.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you, but it's not just that. I mean, the adobe houses, it also comes from a tradition to build, which is humble and simple and modest and beautiful, I think. So yes, you're right. I mean, it is a relatively humble, sort of poor state, but I think it also transcends that. I think you would agree, actually, no?
Yes, of course I would. Renee.
I would just add that in the entries that we most admired, it was not just sort of modesty, but a very wise use and careful use of resources for maximum effect. And so, I think that some of that comes from the particularities of the climate, but also there was very careful research into history and traditions, cultural traditions that were brought forward. And then they're sort of like very honored and a kind of measured approach to how to bring those forward. Not in an exuberant or vulgar kind of way, but a very careful and I felt also well scaled and well proportioned way. There was a lot of attention to the human scale and the scale of the body in space, kind of craft of proportion and scale that I really admired.
And I will continue with Phoebe's point, because in our entries, what we distinguished to was this sense of, this might sound perhaps out of the context, but there was a sense of respect and courtesy with the landscape. And I found that always very powerful, particularly as you will see. It's hard for us to talk without the projects we have in our minds, as we have sworn to secrecy. But I think what it was always a sense of acknowledgement, like something comes before you and after you, and that's what I mean by the respect and the kind of an acknowledgement, which perhaps has to do also with the beauty of the landscape, that in its essence is so pure and so powerful, that our interventions in the landscape cannot operate at another level. It will seem pretentious, or it will seem hubris-like. And I think this is something to reckon with, because we're also doing great damage to that landscape. I mean, we saw a couple of projects that could have been built anywhere in the world, for that matter. And so I think, again, these are topics that I hope tomorrow Phoebe and the rest of those that will participate can hopefully continue on, because they're important topics to bring to the foreground.
I want to build on that to say that I thought there was sometimes a restraint in the landscape that probably was intended to be respect and retaining something that was already wonderful, and yet we know that there's so much damage, or the water issue. There's so much, we need to be bolder about landscapes. So I think one thing I might say is this idea of being bold, and I don't mean being disrespectful. I actually mean being boldly respectful and boldly responsible. that we could really be working with landscape, I think, in ways that are critically important. And it would be great to see that the same attention that's paid to the materiality of the buildings and to the functions of the building, to be thinking about the landscape and the environment in equally robust and bold and responsible ways.
Well said.
I will say that we did see in some of the architecture entries an amazing attention to landscape and design of landscape. And we had a discussion about that, like should this entry be in the landscape architecture category instead of architecture? But for me as a landscape architect, I was like super thrilled to see that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had the same discussion, actually. Exact same discussion. And I agree with you. I mean, to me personally, it's exciting because I have difficulty in sort of distinguishing between architecture and landscape architecture. And I'm interested in both and in the interaction. And I would add to that the urban realm as well. And I like I'm in the College of Environmental Design, and there's 3 departments there. And the idea was that they would sort of interact and merge, and it hasn't happened very much. Although maybe our new dean will get us there. But I mean, from my point of view, it's an ideal, and I find the distinctions not very helpful, in fact.
Well, I think that's a great place to end for our time for the evening. I want to thank all of the jurors for your work and dedication in reviewing all the applications. It was truly wonderful to hear all your comments and thoughts on the entries and sort of the potential future direction of the award. So I think that's very valuable for all of us. And it's really great to hear your feedback and your discussion. Also, I would like to thank all of projects for the Jeff Harnar Awards. It was really incredible to also see your really interesting and thoughtful work focused on many of the issues and challenges that we face in the Southwest here. So that was very great. And thank you everyone for taking the time to pull all of your content together. And lastly, I would like to thank the sponsors of the award, the Thornburg Foundation, and for the School of Architecture and Planning for the support in this award as well. This obviously would not be possible without your generous support. And to close, everyone is most definitely aware of tomorrow night at 5:30 p.m. Mountain Time is going to be the Jeff Harnar Award lecture with Elaine and Craig Dykers from Snøhetta. And that will be followed by the announcement of the award. So we're all looking forward to you all joining us tomorrow night for the notification of who all won these amazing categories. And with that, any final words, Robert?
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone again. We look forward to tomorrow. This is a great sneak peek, and the anticipation only builds with this kind of conversation. So next year, I hope we get to do this as a in-person roundtable with an audience. So let's cross our fingers that we get there. But see you all tomorrow night. Thank you very much. Thank you, Anthony.
Bye.
And Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Bye all. Thanks.
Thanks, Robert.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Robert.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Nice to see you, Fritz.
Good to see you. Bye.